Hi, everyone. If you're coming in, just bear with us while we let in more guests from the waiting room. We'll get started in just a moment, but while you're waiting, if you want to rename yourself, you can right-click on your own square or click on the menu, the three dots in the upper right-hand corner of your own square if you want to add pronouns, affiliation, or change your name in any way. And we'll get started in just a moment.
All right, well, it looks like we've got everyone here and we've got a full room, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion on AI and the future of youth democracy, part of the Burns Center for Social Change's lecture series called Rebooting Democracy in the Age of AI. My name is Dane Gambrell. I'm a research fellow here at the Burns Center, and I'll be co-moderating today's discussion along with my colleague, Bela Omoeva. First, I'd like to thank Daniella, Sneha, and Zamaan for joining us as panelists. I'd like to thank the Burns Center, the GovLab, and the Institute for Experiential Artificial Intelligence at Northeastern for hosting today's discussion. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. So as you know, today's conversation is part of the Burns Center's year-long lecture series, Rebooting Democracy in the Age of AI. So our goal with this series is really to think about how AI and other new technologies can be used to strengthen democracy, and the potential that these tools have to democratize power in governments, in schools, and in workplaces. And you can visit rebootdemocracy.ai to learn more about the series and to register for upcoming talks. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bela, and she's going to tell us more about how the conversation today will work, and we'll introduce our panelists.
Thanks so much, Dane. So yeah, I'm Bela, and I'm a solutions journalism reporter with the Burns Center. Great to be here. Thank you all for coming. So today, the formal program is going to be about an hour. So we're going to spend about the first 40 minutes on a moderated panel discussion. And then about 5:40, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. And if you guys have a question for our panelists, you can share it at any time by typing it in the chat. Then about 6, we're going to conclude the formal program and stop recording and keep the Zoom open for about 30 minutes or as long as people want to stay on to have an informal, unmoderated conversation. But yeah, now I'd like to introduce our panelists and actually kick off the discussion. And we're thrilled to be joined today by 3 panelists whose work explores how youth can be empowered and equipped to thrive in the age of artificial intelligence. So Zamaan Qureshi is an activist and advocate for safer social media for teenagers and young people. He currently serves as a policy advisor and social media coordinator for the Real Facebook Oversight Board, the co-chair of the Design It For Us Coalition, and the member for Council of Responsible Social Media. And we have Daniella DiPaola, who is a PhD student in the Personal Robots group at the MIT Media Lab. And her research interests include understanding the social, emotional, ethical, and legal implications of AI and robots, particularly in the lives of children. And finally, we have Sneha Revanur, who is the founder and president of Encode Justice, which is the world's first and largest youth advocacy group in AI. And she's working to build a social, cultural, and political movement to imagine what AI can do for humanity.
Great, thanks, Bela. And now let's go ahead and kick off the discussion. So to start things off, we'd like to go around the table and ask each of you, Zamaan and then Sneha and then Daniella. For all of you, your work touches in some way on the impacts of AI and related technologies on young people. Can you tell us briefly what your work focuses on, and in particular, why did you choose to focus on young people and AI? And let's start with you, Zamaan.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for having me here. Super excited for this conversation. I co-chair Design It For Us, a coalition of youth activists driving state and federal policy to protect kids and teens online. We focus specifically on young people because we think that social media has had a really negative impact on our mental health as a generation over the course of the last couple of years, and going back, to the inception of Instagram, Snapchat, etc. And I think given the climate in the technology policy space right now, the shift to AI, there's a greater need for us as youth activists to try and think about how these technologies are going to impact our generation. I am not the AI expert here. I think Sneha and Daniela are better served for that, but I can tell you how we're thinking about this. We are specifically working on some policies around this area, so more to come on that from Design It For Us. But I think that we as young people have a unique perspective when it comes to the testing of AI and education in AI. I think testing, as we've seen, as generative AI products have been rolled out by social media companies without really any safeguards in place or any sort of idea about how they've been used or could be misused on our on younger users, and then on education, on how it's impacting schools, the educational environment and classrooms.
Great. And then Sneha, same question to you. Can you tell us more about your work and why you chose to focus on AI and young people?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So honored to be here and excited for this conversation. And as Bella mentioned, I lead an organization called Encode Justice. We're a coalition of young people in AI policy, mobilizing youth all around the world for a human-centered AI future. And I actually got started in this work in 2020, so it's been a little over 3 years. We initially focused on algorithmic bias, but have since expanded to take on all sorts of other risks posed by AI, from democratic erosion to surveillance, disinformation to labor displacement. We're obviously seeing new and novel threats emerge every single day. But I think that, to echo what Zamaan said, the reason why it's so crucial for youth to be involved in these conversations is because our generation is obviously the most hyper-connected yet, and we intimately understand what it's like to grow up in a world where all the information that we consume and everything that we're exposed to is kind of governed by algorithms. And I think that it's really, really critical that our generation, given that lived experience, takes part in conversations about steering the future of AI in a positive direction. And that's really what we're on a mission to do with Encode Justice. And yeah, again, so honored to be here and looking forward to all that we discussed today.
Great. And then Daniela, tell us more about what your work focuses on and why you chose to focus on AI and young people.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And like you mentioned, I'm a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab, and I've been thinking, my broad research question is thinking about how children grow up with these technologies, both in a way that encourages them to use it responsibly, but also in a way where they feel like they have agency and they're not being controlled by algorithms. So I kind of think about this in a twofold way. I design educational resources for K-12 students to think about the societal impacts of AI technologies. And the other half of my work, I do empirical research that answers ethics and policy questions about AI and children. And I kind of came about this through the way of social robotics. I have a particular interest in social technologies, or technologies that are kind of designed to interact interpersonally with people. And I think we're seeing, I started in the field of robotics, but now we're seeing technologies such as ChatGPT and other chatbots are people are putting, they're kind of ascribing behaviors and intentions onto these systems. And I think it's a really important time, especially for children who are starting to develop their social and emotional skills and relationships, that we think a little bit more deeply about how they're using those types of social technologies.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just going to pick up from there. Another question for Daniela. You kind of just touched on this about your work and stuff like that. Could you speak a little more on the types of problems that you're trying to solve by doing this work, and I guess what kind of change you're trying to make?
So I love to tell this story because about 5 years ago, when I started this work, I was working with, I think, 11-year-olds. And when I asked them, what is AI? Everyone's hand shot up and they said it's robots that will take over the world. And I asked them if they've ever used AI or encountered it, and everyone said no. I also asked them, have you ever used YouTube? And everyone's hand shot up. And there was this clear misunderstanding of how AI was already embedded into the systems that they use every single day. And there was this notion of AI as this, futuristic thing that's not impacting me anymore. So a few years ago, if you asked me this question, it was just awareness. I think we're past awareness a little bit, and everyone kind of understands the concept of an algorithm and the concept of how AI can make recommendations or kind of shape the way that we behave. So I think majorly it's to kind of instill this idea that technology is not neutral. It's not always correct, and we should not always give it authority. And it's kind of a reflection of the values and beliefs of other people. So I think majorly a lot of the curricula, we focus on specific issues, but we focus a lot on just understanding that the design of this is not made to be the authority in the room.
And then just one last follow-up, I guess. How does this awareness, or even going beyond awareness with young people in terms of AI and, with the middle school curricula that you've developed, how does that work deepen young people's ability to engage with, the democratic process?
Yeah, so I think it opens up so I worked on a curriculum called the AI and Blueprint Bill of Rights curriculum. It was modeled off of the White House, the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy of the White House put out this guidance for how we should think about AI with regards to our rights. And I saw it as a unique opportunity to bring in some of the technology. And so we had students actually start building classifiers, and they were designing their own recommender algorithms. And at the same time, we were teaching them what are your rights as a US citizen, and why is it important that we have these rights? Why were rights made in the first place? And so they were literally going back and forth. Each lesson had one technical component and a more ethical rights-based component. And I think that the combination of those two helps students contextualize the problems that are happening or the technology that they're using and how it directly impacts their life and will impact their life. And so I think that I've always kind of used that model of combining the two of them together to kind of get to that goal.
Awesome. And our next question is for Sneha and for Zamaan. So in your work with Encode Justice and Design It For Us, respectively, you've both mobilized large groups of young people to advocate for guardrails on the use of AI. And like you touched upon, in particular, to protect to protect kids and teenagers from harms driven by social media algorithms. Can you each tell us a little bit more about the changes that you're advocating for, and how do your groups arrive at those positions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I obviously want to give Zamaan the space to talk about some of the big online safety bills that DIFU or Design It For Us has been active around, but I will go ahead and talk about some of the broader reforms we've been calling for in the AI space. So one huge thing that Encode Justice is calling for, in addition to all of the online safety reforms, is the creation of a federal agency for AI, kind of like the FDA or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to ensure that AI models are safe, fair, and reliable before they are deployed, placing the onus on the developer to ensure that that's the case, and to audit models for possible risks to our society, economy, and democracy, again, before they impact the public. We need a whole of government approach to regulation, but we also need an agency with the personnel, the funding, and the expertise to prevent harm from AI before it happens, and also create accountability for harms that have already occurred. So we need both a proactive and reactive approach. We also have been in support of legislation like the AI Labeling Act, which mandates disclosures for AI-generated content that young people are becoming increasingly inundated with. So it's really critical that we, not only push for a broader regulatory regime for AI in the US that, again, places the onus on the developer to ensure that models are safe before they're deployed, but we also, of course, need to address the, increasing omnipresence of political misinformation generated by AI, which could seep into our information ecosystem. But I obviously want to go ahead and pass it on to Zamaan, who can talk more about the Kids Online Safety Act and some other really important reforms.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the way that I think about this is the same actors that are involved in the social media conversation are also involved in the AI conversation. And that's been brought about because a lot of the technology industry looked at the sort of future of how the industry was going to evolve. And Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, the big players in this space, and especially Google and Facebook, looked at this space and said, we're going to lose out if we don't innovate and change course in the way that we're investing in some of our products. And so that's why we see as soon as ChatGPT was rolled out, GPT-4 by OpenAI, this rush to create generative AI products by Meta and by Google, and without any sort of real safeguards or checks in place, it was a sort of knee-jerk reaction. Google maybe held on a little bit longer to say that, we're working on something to make sure it's a little bit safer. But the goal was market capture at the end of the day. And so I think that's what's concerning to me, is that these are the same companies, especially Facebook, who's had probably one of the worst weeks in corporate history. A whistleblower came forward, new evidence surfaced that executives can't get through to their CEO about protecting kids and teens online. So how can we trust these same actors to be able to build in place safeguards to protect people in the AI space? And I also think that these conversations, to both Daniela and Sneha's points, these conversations cannot happen in a vacuum. They are intrinsically intertwined. AI systems power the algorithms that we use on our mobile devices, on our social media, etc. And so I think it's really important that when we're thinking about policy, that policy reflects that. The actual policy that's being proposed, the way that we've gone about thinking about this, is that the policies really need to be grounded in choice, and that young people need to be able to have the ability to choose what their online experience looks like. And the reason we've arrived at that is because the notion right now that exists in the industry is that we are the product. We are the consumers, the passive consumers of information, and algorithms are turned on their head to basically tell us what content we should be looking at in a very passive experience. And so what we want to see is policies like the Kids Online Safety Act. We've also endorsed two others, COPPA 2.0 and the Kids Privacy Act, that aim and target at giving young people tools back, because we know the technology companies are not going to build this in on their own. They need legislation and regulation to really push them to. And the last thing I'll say is that on this point is that I think the AI conversation, as it's happening right now, we're sort of seeing a policy race, an arms race, if you will. The past 2 weeks, we saw this uptick in US, UK jostling for, who's got the better policies. I really do think, though, that if we're continuing to invite companies like Clearview AI to the conversation and OpenAI, and giving them the same seat at the table as civil society, it concerns me about who's writing the rules and the policies here. I applaud Senator Schumer and the majority leader's office for sort of building this conversation around in Congress right now, but I worry about who are the actors who are actually shaping some of those.
Just to expand on that point a little bit, and this is a question for all of you, Zamaan, Daniela, Sneha, I guess, what would you say are the impediments to, enabling young people to play a more powerful or more influential role in the decisions in the areas where your work is focused? Like, for example, what does it look like to be Sneha and Zamaan as young people, in these spaces that aren't really, designed for people, of a younger age to kind of push for the policies that you guys advocate for? And Daniela, what are the impediments to, effective AI education and, children's rights and all of that?
Yeah, I think one huge piece of the problem is the fact that the AI space is one that is just rife with credentialism. I think that pretty much all AI conversations and all discourse around AI is just coded in technical jargon. And I think that leads people to believe that these conversations are inaccessible or abstract or just detached from daily life. And I think that definitely precludes public participation. I think that's been a huge hurdle we've had to overcome in really trying to get youth engaged. For example, Encode Justice, in addition to our advocacy work, actually operates a workshop program, and we go directly to high school and college students and talk about the implications of AI socially, politically, and environmentally. And we ask them, before we leave these workshops, what do you know about AI? What preconceived notions do you have, and what comes to mind when you hear these words? And we ask them more about their lived experiences and their, prior knowledge. And it's very clear that, a lot of them seem to view this as like some intimidating, distant phenomenon that is never going to impact their lived reality, or decisions about this should be made by academics or those in corporate boardrooms. And I think that is obviously a very distorted perception. And so I think that we've really had to overcome that hurdle in trying to engage young people. And so I think, one of the huge impediments so far has just been how widespread I think jargon has been. I think how heavily emphasized credentials are, and a very specific set of credentials are in the AI space, where, obviously you've got computer science PhDs kind of ruling the roost, or, AI companies and their teams ruling the roost. And so I think that it's really time for us to move away from that.
Completely agree with everything Sneha said. I think one of the challenges I see, recently an op-ed was published by Columbia Law professor, now Columbia Law professor, who his name is Tim Wu. He used to work in the White House on competition policy, on technology policy. And in this Atlantic article, he basically sums up the politics and egos that got in the way of passing a sweeping bipartisan piece of legislation, the Kids Online Safety Act, in 2022. And I think it gave a really good window into not only how special interests, big tech lobbyists, but also politics and egos within the policy sphere get in the way of doing real meaningful work. And I think, like Sneha said, a lot of these spaces are not conducive to bringing young people into the conversation. I think it's definitely been a challenge at the beginning to not only communicate why we think our message is important, but also signal to people that we have lived experiences on social media that are worthwhile and worth sharing. And I think that has been sort of exemplified more recently by the leaders who have invited us to the table. I specifically want to shout out people like Senator Blumenthal and Senator Durbin, who really tried to help elevate our voices. My co-chair, Emma Lemke, was invited to the Senate Judiciary Committee in February to testify on social media issues. And myself, Sneha, and Emma were also invited to the White House for the unveiling of the AI executive order. These are the kinds of moves that I think, while they're exciting to be able to participate in, they also show the rest of our generation that we're taking you guys seriously and you have a meaningful seat at the table. Not everyone thinks that way though, and it's part of our job to continue pushing the needle forward and letting people know why our lived experiences are not only unique to this conversation, but also that we can bring the policy shops as well. A lot of us are passionate, self-taught young individuals who basically figured out how to have a say on some of this stuff on our own and learn from mentors in the space and learn from our peers. I learned so much from Sneha on AI policy. That's where we really want to see more continued action, is welcoming these kinds of voices into the space. And that's what we're going to continue to pioneer doing.
Great. And I totally agree with what kind of came before me. And I want to, I guess, add on in the education sphere. AI is definitely moving incredibly quickly. And I think that, educators haven't been formally trained in AI literacy and AI education. And so we're kind of, I think the role that we can have in shaping teacher professional development, having teachers be kind of aware and excited about teaching AI, and not just in this in a computer science classroom or a technology classroom. I think that the thought here is that we need to embed it across disciplines because it is going to affect many different disciplines, and we all need to be thinking about kind of the ways that it's embedding itself into our lives. So from an education standpoint, I would definitely, advocate for more teacher development, teacher training, and ways to get these educational programs out there, while also keeping the professional development up to date and kind of new and based on the latest trends. I think it's a really hard problem to kind of go after.
Yeah, and sort of picking up on the points that you've all started to make so far. Another common theme for all three of you in your work is sort of thinking about or advocating for youth to really understand how they're being impacted by AI, but also for young people to have agency and to be empowered to have a say in how technology that impacts them is used. I wonder if you can tell us more about how do you envision that change happening? And looking towards the future, how would you like to see young people engaging in these types of conversations? Whoever wants to start, please jump in.
I can kick it off. I think for me, it's a few things. One, I think lived experiences with the technologies are really important, and young people have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to that. So one, like reflecting on the experiences that they already have with technology, but also learning how to create and make with it. I think that by showing that I'm able to build this system, or this is the way that I want to shape AI in the future, I think that's super powerful for young people to be able to demonstrate. And the next piece is kind of having young people understand how AI is impacting their direct communities and having conversations about that. Do they know where AI is being used in their communities? I really like to think about, I think if I think about the future and where it could go, Somerville, Massachusetts, which is a town right over from Cambridge where I am, they were one of the first to ban facial recognition technology that was being used in their town. And I think that it was largely because a lot of people were in this tech space and understood facial recognition technology and some of the harms it could cause. And so I think like we want to make sure that young people have the knowledge of the ways that AI can impact them and their communities so that they can go and advocate for them. I think AI is something that we will need to be voting on in the next few years. And I think a nice example of that is one of my colleagues, Rachel Walker. She runs a data activism program where she has young people actually collect data in their communities and they work with it. They learn how to do different types of analysis on that data, and then they go and they share that with community organizations so that those organizations can make more informed policies.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of my friends, a few of my friends, when I told them that Design It For Us was working on an AI policy, said, "Oh, please don't get rid of ChatGPT. Like, I need ChatGPT for my classes and things." And I think it's interesting to see how ChatGPT has evolved in this conversation over the past couple of months. I mean, it's really been a short time span. You've had universities rolling out kind of like policies or guidance for professors around how to police the use of ChatGPT in the classroom, in whatever educational discipline it might be. The problem is that some of these tools to check generative AI aren't very good. And so we've also seen this wave of conversations, I think, across the country where professors have failed to report or have reported students as having used ChatGPT in a paper for almost the entire class or something like that. I think this is the tension that we're getting at. And I think Daniela hit the nail on the head. It's like, we need to think about how can we deploy AI systems to do the good things that we want to see them do. A lot of the conversation is focused on the existentialism and the bad. And while we should absolutely be thinking about what the longer term impacts and implications are of very high powered generative systems of large language models deployed in the defense industry, we also need to be thinking about how we can deploy it in a way that's really effective to bringing about change to our educational environment. and empowering people to do that. I think that's what we can kind of shape this conversation around as well is, how do we implement AI in the classroom, for example, in a way that allows educators to understand how the product works themselves, but B, use it to enhance the educational experience, recognizing that it's here to stay and that we're not going to be able to ban it or get rid of it. And this is the same sort of similar conversation we have in the social media conversation, is that banning young people from social media does not solve the problem. Inevitably, they're either going to find a way around that verification check or that ban, and then we're all left with the same problems where we started from. And so I think what I want to see is policies that evolve in a way to think more proactively. There's a researcher, his name's Carsten Jung at IPPR. He compared this to the climate movement. He's like, with climate, you implemented all of these policies to regulate pollution, to regulate fossil fuels, greenhouse gases, but you also had the investment in renewables. That was the positive push in the conversation. You had ways that people could get involved in taking a more greener approach to their life. I think that's how we need to start thinking about AI as well, is that while we're trying to regulate the existential threats, we also need to be thinking about how can we promote the use of these technologies in a way that has a positive societal impact.
Okay. That was a great answer, just for the record. I think just to piggyback off of that, a question to Zamaan and to everyone, I guess, what does it look like when, engagement from young people is, really meaningful? Like, it's not just checking the box. It's not just kind of being tokenized or saying like, oh, it's so cute that you guys are learning about this. But what is that difference? Like, where would you guys draw that distinction between meaningful engagement and, just kind of lip service? And just before you guys answer, just a reminder to everyone, we will have a Q&A in about 10 minutes. So any questions you may have in the chat, put them in. If not, we're happy to keep asking questions since it's a really great discussion here. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think when I think about what meaningful engagement could look like, there are a couple of principles I have in mind. First of all, meaningful engagement is not one-off. It is like a living, breathing relationship that continues over a period of time. I think it's so easy to invite, a young person to one event or to one meeting and pat yourself on the back and check the box. But I think that when it comes to building AI responsibly, when it comes to governing AI responsibly, that relationship needs to endure. That relationship needs to come in the form of multiple consultations, multiple meetings, and kind of a conversation over a longer period of time, because I think it's too easy for us to applaud ourselves after just one conversation. So I think that's definitely one really important point. I think also we're seeing a push to include young people on oversight and advisory boards when it comes to AI governance, and it's really important that these, on these boards, young people actually have, voting power. Young people actually have the ability to actually hold sway and to influence decisions that are being made in corporate boardrooms and within government as well. And so I think that making sure that youth are equal stakeholders that have voting power and that have equal rights and obligations in those capacities is really, really critical. So I think those are two principles that I think about in terms of making sure that we're being engaged meaningfully. But Bela, I think what you called out is so, so true. I think all of us know that experience of people thinking that, we're just so adorable that we're working in this space, and it's just ultimately reduces to tokenization, and that's obviously really harmful. And I think something else that that is really, really harmful, just to close off the point that I was making, is that it's also really important to recognize that we are experts, outside of being young people as well. We have issue area expertise and have informed perspectives on these policy issues. And, we're not here only to speak about youth engagement and public participation and the importance of those two things, but we can also weigh in on these thornier policy debates and actually, hold key political and strategic insights and be able to participate in those conversations in a more substantive way. And so I think that, to everyone who is, trying to engage youth meaningfully in AI discourse, I obviously implore you to think of us not only as people who are participating in the conversation as youth or as representatives of our generation, but also as experts in our own right who have valuable policy expertise and can really contribute to the conversation in meaningful ways if you give us a platform to do so. So I think that's also a really important perspective to highlight.
Danielle, go for it.
I just wanted to build off of that point around expertise, because I think that some of the most successful collaborations with youth and policymakers that I've seen have come from youth demonstrating their expertise or bringing their expertise to the table, and everyone else kind of taking a seat and saying, okay, we're going to learn from you and we're going to engage with what you have to say. There's a awesome organization in Cambridge called Innovators for Purpose, and they spent their summer learning about artificial intelligence, and at the end of the summer they brought in community members to come and learn what artificial intelligence was. And I think that's like a super meaningful opportunity for everyone to say, oh, we like youth here are thinking about this. They are the experts in this. We should be learning from them. And then going back to my colleague, Rachel Walker's project, she had youth kind of working alongside these community organizations. So the organization came to them and said, these are the problems that we're facing. Youth then went and used their data science skills to help them solve those problems. And they were really treated like a partner. And so I think that that's one way that we can start to make have youth feel like they're making meaningful change over time.
Yep, completely agree with all of those points. And to echo specifically what Sneha said, I think one of the interesting experiences that I've had in this policy discussion and the policy conversation is that we're so often thought of, to Bela, to your point, as like, oh, it's so cute, you guys are here to talk about policy. And then we're like, okay, so why hasn't your member advanced this bill yet? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, we have to have a real conversation here. But demonstrating that we have the expertise and the knowledge, even though we might have to have twice or three times what perhaps an adult advocate walking into the halls of Congress would have to have, really speaks to advancing our generation's goals in this area. You know, I think meaningful engagement looks like a number of things, and there's a number of ways to do it. But I think at the end of the day, at its core, it's about actually co-collaboration and thinking about things that you can learn from that person and that person can learn from us. I think those are the best interactions I've had. One in particular that has been continuously ongoing for a number of weeks, where I bounce ideas off of this one person and they bounce off ideas off of me. And this is to the benefit of a particular policy that has yet to be unveiled yet. And so that's really exciting to be able to participate in that, but it's also really important. It's really important that they are getting our buy-in into these things, because we were able to flag for them things that they hadn't even considered yet. And so I think as we're taking, bringing youth voices into this conversation, youth activism has taken on a number of forms. I think as youth activists, we're lucky as well because we can use our title strategically. Sometimes we can be youth activists and sometimes we can be activists and experts. And I think knowing how to deploy that and in what rooms you're deploying that is really useful and helpful. But I think over the long term, what I hope is that this technology space, this movement of youth activists in the technology, big tech, AI conversation is creating a new form of engagement with policymakers that hasn't existed before. I think we've seen young people really effectively mobilize as agitators and calling attention to issues, but we also are seeing more and more young people play a pivotal role in working within systems to create change. And I think both are important and equally powerful, but I think the latter has been underinvested in a money and a time perspective. So I'm looking forward to seeing, as we continue to chart this, how others are inviting those young people into the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for a really great discussion. It's been an honor having you here. We're going to wrap up the more moderated discussion here, so we have time for questions from the audience. And we're going to go through the questions in the chat first. And then if you guys have any more, just continue to put those there. But I'll let Dane, I think, introduce the next event that we have briefly.
Yes. So yeah, I'll just briefly introduce the next event, and then we will move to questions from the audience. So before we open it up, I wanted to let you know that the next event in our Rebooting Democracy in the Age of AI lecture series is called Combining Human and Machine Intelligence to Enhance Democracy. So that talk is going to be led by Sir Jeff Mulgan, who's a professor at the University College London. And so that's going to be a conversation about whether democracy can support effectiveness, amplifying the intelligence of the society rather than dumbing it down. So we'll share in the chat some information about how you can register for that event. It will be held virtually and also in person at Northeastern's Alumni Center. And it will be on Thursday, November 16th from 5 to 6 p.m. Yeah, and with that, I'll go back to our questions from the audience now. So the first question that I wanted to pose to the panel is from Ernesto. So Ernesto asks, is there a relation, or what is the relation between AI and democracy as it concerns participation of public decisions for young people? And I picked this question because it's similar to something that I wanted to ask you all, which is sort of thinking about so much of the conversation is dominated by the negative, the way that AI is going to eat the world. But we really want to also think about, especially with this lecture series, how can AI be used to sort of to deepen or to create new opportunities for young people to participate in democracy? So I'll just open that up. Whoever wants to jump in first, please go ahead.
I'll start, and I'll be the downer so somebody can pick it up and be the more positive voice. I think AI presents the most pressing threats to democracy right now. Yesterday, we had a number of CEOs from technology companies meeting with lawmakers behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, talking about what their election policies would look like as it relates to generative AI and products. Facebook recently rolled out a new policy that says that you cannot use their generative products in paid political ads. But what that fails to take into account is third-party generative products that have created ads off of Meta products and then are being deployed onto Facebook ad spend. I think as we're thinking about this, I'm particularly concerned with those policies not being in place by the time that we have major elections in 2024, and not just in the United States. As part of a new law in the European Union, we get access to new information about technology companies. It's called the Digital Services Act. And under the DSA requirements, companies have to list there are a number of content moderators that they employ by language in each of the European jurisdictions. And for Twitter, now X, for example, some of those numbers were astounding. There were like 0 people, 1 person, 2 people for languages that are well spoken across the European Union. So that's my fear and my concern. We know that there's a whole separate problem and possibility with that's been well covered by Time Magazine about the content moderators, especially in Kenya, but a company called Sama that have been paid $2 an hour to do content moderation on GPT-4, and on Facebook, for example, that are pushing to unionize. These are the impacts that I'm thinking about when I think as it relates to democracy. And so unfortunately, I don't really have a very rosy view of how these products can be deployed to do some good. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind off the top of my head right now is voter registration. I think that we've seen very cumbersome processes employed by our local governments to try and get people to register to vote. And I can only imagine what we'd be able to do if we were able to use a product like that to do it that way.
I think we can move on to the second question if we don't have Sneha and Daniela.
I would just I guess one way that I've been thinking a lot about how AI could potentially, I guess, help students see a brighter future. I really think that AI is really ripe for creative practice, and we know that creative practice in the past is very much helped people empathize with one another, shared our perspectives, helped kind of demonstrate the world that we want to see. And I think that with generative, especially generative art, that is closer than ever to it's more accessible than ever for somebody to create something that models what they want to see the future look like. One of my colleagues worked on an activity with high school youth where they imagined their future careers and they made photos of themselves in these future careers. And not only was it important for them to visualize themselves and make an image that represented what they wanted their futures to look like, but they were also able to take that tangible artifact and communicate it with somebody else and share their perspective with someone else. So I think there is cool opportunities with when it comes to writing and art for students to be able to use the tools for their benefit.
Yeah, those are great examples from both Daniela and Zamaan. I think when I answer this question, I do want to return to the name of my organization, ENCODE Justice, which I think implies an aspirational vision in which we have justice and this human-centered vision embedded at the core of the technology that we're trying to build. I think that fundamentally the work that we're doing is rooted in this belief that technology can and should serve the common good and that it is possible to deploy technology in radically positive ways. So for example, I actually got my start in advocacy with ENCODE Justice in response to a ballot measure in California that was, trying to enshrine the use of an algorithm in place of the already flawed system of cash bail. And what's actually really interesting is that we've seen, an outgrowth of algorithms like that are being used to evaluate criminal defendants on their flight risk, on their public safety risk, and all these other kind of more punitive criteria. But it's actually really interesting to see how algorithms can also be used to flip the script and to challenge those power structures and narratives. We've also seen awesome teams from labs like the MIT Media Lab that have developed algorithms to actually rate judges on how likely they are to violate the Constitution with their rulings. And I think that's an excellent way to kind of reimagine and flip that kind of line of thinking on its head. And I think that there are so many more examples of how we can use technology to counter the existing systems that we're seeing all across our society. And I think that the work that I do at ENCODE Justice is really guided by a belief that technology should look more like that.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So we have another question from, I think, Kane, related to AI and kind of its relationship with the democratic process and government. So the question is, how have government-led or initiated AI integrations, such as chatbots, resource optimization, etc., how have those systematically influenced the younger generations so far? And what are some insights to kind of the future of this process or future interventions related to this? We can also restate, I guess. I think that was a wordy question, but to restate that, let's see. I guess how have these government-led AI kind of, chatbots, whatever it may be, kind of influenced the younger generations? And I guess how would that compare to non-private AI, whatever it may be? And just, anyone who wants to take that.
Yeah, I can start. I don't know what the government deployments of chatbots have looked like. In my experience, they haven't happened yet. And that is laid out in the executive order, actually, on how federal agencies can deploy AI in its all the things that our federal agencies do in the United States. But yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I do think that there are ways that AI chatbots can be helpful. Um, but I also think that we run a risk as well. So you can absolutely have AI chatbots, for example. Like I do a lot of Freedom of Information Act work, and it's a very cumbersome old law that frankly is not respected very well by federal agencies. But what you could do is you could create a program or a system to allow for people to better understand how likely it is that they're going to get access to a particular record, how to go about getting that record, etc. All part of like government transparency and disclosure, which I think kind of gets back to the question. But what I will also say is that that runs the risk of human-centered approaches being really key in the deployment of government. So, for example, in passport cases or in all the work that our civil servants do for the State Department to get people out of countries, either because they've lost a passport or in a really dangerous situation, that because each situation is so unique and every situation requires the handling of whatever it is differently, I think that's where it's really important that you have a human at the center of that conversation. So it's a measured approach, I think, as I think about the way that governments can deploy AI within their systems.
Yeah, and I'll jump in to ask the next question. So in the chat, Beth says, we have a lot of students here who are building AI for social good. I hope some of them might share their projects. And then question to the panelists is, what can we do more of in universities to encourage better uses of AI for public good and strengthening democracy, and to avoid the risks that you all are wary of? Zamaan, do you want to start there, since you've talked a lot about the risks?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So I think that what I would really like to see in the deployment of AI in universities and across education, actually, I think so. So let me backtrack. There was a proposal in Illinois, a biometric privacy law, and the biometric privacy law was aimed at stopping the use of fingerprints, face scans, etc., from being deployed on young people. I think we can all agree that that's generally a good principle. But the way that the law was implemented by the Chicago Public School District was an overly broad approach. And so CPD banned banned a lot of coding platforms that kids were using to learn how to code, like Scratch, in Chicago public schools. And so basically what ended up happening is that all of these teachers who had learned how to use those kinds of products to teach whatever it was to their students were unable to access those basically overnight. And CPS, not CPD, CPS kind of said, oh, well, we'll work on it. We'll try and figure out a way to figure this out. I think what we really need is like, let's empower our teachers and educators here to be really meaningful contributors to this conversation. It's not like, oh, AI is happening to us. Like, let's do something to be involved in the happening of AI. I think it's AI is like the wrong word to use, to be honest, at this point, because it means so many different things. But the point being that there are products that are not super difficult to learn. And I think the conversation around AI often creates the feeling of like learned helplessness, where you feel like the thing is too big to take on, and so you choose to ignore it or kind of push it to the side. So coming back to Beth's question, I think what I would like to see is thinking about like, how can we use ChatGPT in a policy class, or in a English class, or in any kind of liberal arts class, to enhance what the field of education is. So say, for example, there's an assignment, a writing assignment. Teacher asks you to generate 3 different responses from ChatGPT, and then you dissect why each of those fail to meet the standards of the rigor that your professor, that your course lecturer, whoever it is looking for. Those are the kinds of interactions that I think are really interesting, because ChatGPT, while maybe not super accurate right now, is going to get more accurate over time because it just learns from itself. And so thinking and figuring out ways to stop the passive the passive assignments that we do in class and in school just for the sake of doing them, to go and recollect information, actually engaging in a really analytical way and thinking about things using that technology.
Yeah, I definitely echo exactly what you said. And I think that like integrating, if ethics is taught at every part of the design process, if we're thinking about computer science programs or engineering programs, and we have university educators who are teaching these very like, we have processes for engineering. I went to engineering school. We learned, here's the engineering process, so you design something. I encourage people to think about ethics as a core piece of that process, not at the end, and make sure that's being taught throughout the period of time that you're creating it, and to think about different stakeholders that you're designing for throughout that entire process. So I hope that universities can do they can start integrating in these types of courses throughout the semester rather than just at the end. And I think that will help students, when they leave universities, say, okay, this is just a part of my process. This is how you design something responsibly.
I think we're gonna squeeze in one more question. This isn't one of the Q&A stuff, but we figured since it is somewhat relevant, we should ask you guys. Last week, President Biden issued an executive order that places new requirements on businesses to adhere to AI standards that he's outlined, and it instructs federal departments and agencies to establish plans and policies related to AI risk mitigation. And I guess I wanted to ask you guys, what are your reactions to this executive order? Does it go far enough? Does it go too far? And just, the quick take from you guys.
Yeah, I think that the executive order, it's a fantastic starting point for, I think, a really broad regulatory regime. It's very sweeping, 111 pages, packed with provisions, and it seems like it's almost a laundry list of priorities. And I think that it's honestly really almost impressive how they have tried to speak to the concerns of such a wide range of communities and camps in the AI community that obviously have such diverging priorities. I think that at this point, though, what I'm really looking to is the implementation of the order, because it obviously is very promising where it is right now, but it will require follow through from agencies like the Office of Management and Budget. It will require that agencies are beefed up because a lot of the provisions in the framework actually rely on NIST, which is notoriously understaffed and underfunded. And I think it's really important to recognize that while in the abstract, a lot of what's in the executive order is very promising, it can't actually realize its full potential unless we, again, are giving agencies the funding, the personnel, and the staff that they need to actually fully implement those provisions. And I think that's really important. Also, one thing that I do want to highlight is that even though, again, this EO is a great starting point, it cannot be a substitute for concrete legislative action. That needs to be a supplement. And I think that it's really, really important that we are still continuing to double down on urging Congress to pass AI legislation and get a bill over the finish line. I think that we initially were optimistic that that could happen before the end of the year, or that there could at least be bill text by the end of the year, but that is obviously looking less and less likely, and it's probably not going to be the case that we have bill text until early 2024, because Leader Schumer has insisted that Congress is still in the classroom. And frankly, I'm really concerned about that timeline, because obviously we are heading into a presidential election year. And given the clamor of partisan politics, it totally is plausible that, the AI conversation, as much hype and interest as it has received, will be entirely overshadowed by the oncoming presidential election and all of the associated fanfare. And so I think it's really, really important that we act quickly on a legislative front as well. So I think that, of course, even though the EO is a great starting point, we need to continue to act with as much urgency as we can on the congressional level. And we need to be looking to agencies like OMB and calling on OSTP and other bodies within the federal government and within the executive branch to really see this EO through and make sure that all of its provisions are implemented. And so I think that's kind of my general response, but definitely applaud the Biden administration for putting together such a comprehensive list of priorities and of policy proposals. And I'm really, really excited to see that they've been receptive to civil society groups that have tried to shape the discussion.
I'll go really fast here. Good on the Federal Trade Commission end. I'm looking forward to competition policy enforcement to prevent market capture. I would have liked to see more on algorithmic bias and discrimination. I thought that section was lacking. But I think if you read between the lines throughout the entire executive order, and at every point along the way, it is Congress needs to act. And I think that's what the executive order continues to signal. It's what the Biden administration has done from the start on technology policy across the board, is that we as a executive branch can only go so far. It's when we need our legislative branch to step up. So I am looking forward to Leader Schumer doing a lot of things over the next couple of months.
And I'll add one quick a comment about specifically AI in education. I think we see it come up 2 times in the executive order. One, the executive order includes the Secretary of Education within the next year to come up with some guardrails for using AI in education. I think this is super needed. I'd love to see some more coordination between the Secretary of Education's office and NIST to be able to kind of bridge some of the same the groundwork that's happening in NIST into the education department. And then the second one, there is a lot of funding that's going towards AI literacy, specifically from NSF. And I think that that's super exciting and hopefully means that more students will be kind of learning about AI and pursuing AI related careers.
Awesome. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap up the formal part of the discussion now. Thanks again, everyone, for being here, and thanks to our 3 panelists for joining us. Yeah, so what's going to happen now is we'll turn off the recording, but we will do what we call an informal discussion or virtual